Hello and welcome to India's World. A court in Bangladesh has issued an arrest warrant for the opposition leader Begum Khaleda Zia over an arson attack on a bus that killed 2 people and injured dozens last year. This is the second arrest warrant against her this year. While more than a dozen cases have been filed against Begum Zia, her party's Secretary General Mirza Fakhrul Islam Alamgir has 90 criminal cases filed against him. On an average, senior BNP leaders face about 50 criminal cases each. Bangladeshi politics has been mired for years in rivalry between Sheikh Hasina and Begum Khaleda Zia. This rivalry continues, has only increased after the BNP boycotted the 2014 general election, demanding a free and fair election under a neutral caretaker government. Since then, not only has there been sporadic but intense street violence, but also attacks against foreign nationals and secular bloggers. This has brought unprecedented international attention to the growth of extremism in Bangladesh. There have also been apprehensions about the Islamic State recruiting in Bangladesh and the country emerging as the breeding ground for violent extremism in this region. Today we ask whether the roots of Islamic extremism in Bangladesh lie in its dysfunctional politics. To discuss this, we have with us a very distinguished panel of experts. We have with us Ambassador Pinak Ranjan Chakravarty, a distinguished diplomat. He has served as India's ambassador to Thailand and as High Commissioner to Dhaka. We have with us Professor S.D. Muni, an expert on South Asia. He is Professor Emeritus at School of International Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. He is also a distinguished fellow at the Institute of Defence Studies and Analysis. He was also India's ambassador to Laos. And we have with us Mr. Hiranmay Karlekar, a distinguished journalist. He is consulting editor of The Pioneer. He was earlier the editor of the Hindustan Times. He is author of a book, Bangladesh, the Next Afghanistan, which he published in 2005.
Yeah.
I welcome you, gentlemen, to this discussion. Pinak, let me begin with you. Why does the rivalry between Begum Khaleda Zia and Sheikh Hasina seem like a zero-sum game? Why does democratic politics in Bangladesh have to mean that one party has to finish off the other completely?
That's an unfortunate thing, but that is how the democratic discourse in Bangladesh has been established for quite some time. That it is, but then if you look at the election results since return of democracy in around 1991, when Ershad was removed through a public, people's agitation, it has been generally that one party has come to power, then the next, the incumbent has always lost. So this alternating system has continued till the last election when the BNP boycotted and they, obviously, Prime Minister Hasina came back to power. Now, there is an intense rivalry between the two personally, plus also the psychological makeup of the two leaders are completely different. Whereas Begum Khaleda Zia is clearly a kind of a right-wing nationalist. You know, she follows General Ziaur Rahman's philosophy of that we are not Bengalis, but we are Bangladeshis. And the more Islamic tendency that they brought in after the assassination of Bangabandhu Mujibur Rahman, she reflects that tendency, which also makes her closer. Cozying up to Pakistan becomes one of their options. And this we have seen time and again when she has been in power. And Hasina, obviously, having spent her life in exile in India, her children went to school in India, etc., clearly has a different sort of psychological makeup, and which makes her more secular. For example, she gets the bulk of the minority vote, the Hindu vote in Bangladesh, because she maintains a stand of secular. Now, behind all this, there are all kinds of politics, but that's the general kind.
Okay. Professor Muni, do you think that the most recent ratcheting up of tensions between the two parties has to do with the BNP boycotting the 2014 general election? Awami League winning it, BNP claiming that it's an illegal victory because more than half the seats were uncontested, and the setting up of these two special courts to try the war criminals of 1971.
Well, I would go a little behind even what Pinak said. The rivalry and differences between the two parties actually are rooted into their origin.
Yeah.
If you look into the ideology, if you look into the historical conditions and situation in which they really came up. And I think Pinak has very rightly brought it up to the present context. And even in present context, there are sharp ideological points of dispute between the two, like this BNP claiming to be the protector of Islamic conscience, or Bangladeshi profile.
Does it say it's protector of Islamic conscience?
It says it would want to protect the
use a different
Islamic
word,
conscience.
actually. They use-
Well, to some extent, it has been reported in the media in that respect. And this is where the roots are absolutely important. So far as the elections are concerned, I would say the BNP was unhappy even with the way the caretaker government conducted elections, because they were hoping that the BNP, the caretaking government was appointed by them and they would have favorable results. And suddenly they found that Awami League won with the kind of results which it came about.
So this spike in tensions can be traced back to 2014.
It is rooted into the power structure, and it's not related to 2014 only.
Okay.
It comes back much before that. So they have this rivalry inbuilt into them, and that's what it gets manifested in one way or the other.
Okay. Hiranmay, do you think there are two competing views of Bangladeshi nationalism, one represented by BNP, the other represented by Awami League?
Before I go to that, I'll just like to point out the bitter rivalry between Khaleda Zia and Sheikh Hasina is also a result of the Liberation War of 1971. The Liberation War of 1971 saw the most unspeakable atrocities inflicted on Bangladesh. That is one I have been personally witness to. Some of this, it's unbelievable. And that polarized the society, particularly since some of Khaleda Zia's allies between 2001 and 2006 were actively involved in assisting the Pakistani army. So that is one.
But BNP itself was founded by a freedom fighter.
I'll come to that. But don't forget, there's the other element. Anti-Sheikh Mujib, pro-Sheikh Mujib. The fact that Ziaur Rahman and others who came into power after the killing of Sheikh Mujib were, if not directly involved, certainly were indulgent towards the massacre of Sheikh Mujib's family, has completely scarred Sheikh Hasina. Even her 7-year-old brother Russell was not spared. It was an absolutely. Second, not only was Mujib murdered, on the night of 7th November 1975, some of the stalwarts of the Awami League were murdered where? Inside the Dhaka jail. So the result was that there has been a polarization. Not only that, after coming into power, Ziaur Rahman completely wiped out all traces of Mujib's contribution. So because of the counter-offensive Raj by Ziaur Rahman, who also forged very close ties with Pakistan. After all, the DGFI, Directorate General of Forces Intelligence, has been modeled after the ISI. And in 1971 or 76, I'm just checking on that, he invited the Director General of the ISI. And it was with the assistance of the Director General of ISI, the DGFI, Director General of Forces, was built. So on the one hand, there's a bitter personal acrimony. On the other hand, there's a rivalry about who really led to the liberation of Bangladesh. And the third point was, of course, the ideological differences. Okay. And in 2008, if you remember, 2006, there was a coup of sorts. January 2007. That coup removed Begum Khaleda Zia from power. And before that, the elections were being held in such a way that they were bound to be doctored.
But we're going to discuss this because you seem to suggest that this dysfunctional politics has a rationale.
A historical root.
It has roots.
Historical
You're not
roots.
rationalizing it.
No, what I'm saying is I'm just explaining what is causing it.
All right. We need to take a break at this point. We'll be back again in a bit. Stay with us. Don't go away. Welcome back. We are discussing the polarized politics of Bangladesh and its consequences. Pinak, do you think that escalating the secular versus Islamic political tension leaves very little space for religious identity and breeds radicalization in Bangladesh? By that I mean that Awami League professes an almost authoritarian secularism. I don't know whether they're really secular. And this creates or can create grounds for grievances amongst those who see themselves as Muslims, as those who see their identity as Islamic. So in an Islamic country, you call yourself secular, and then deny space to Islamic identity, does that create problems?
I don't think that Bangladesh, being a secular country, denies space to to practice your religion, for example, or being a Muslim. The Islamist tendency is a different factor altogether. It is true that Bangladesh is majority Muslim, but as the founding father of Bangladesh clearly enunciated a secular polity in that sense.
Irshad made it an Islamic Republic, and Awami League has changed everything except that bit.
Except because Awami League is not sure whether they should touch it, because they do feel that the Islamic kind of feelings, etc., might then go out of hand a bit. And don't forget that she's cracked down very hard on the Islamists, the main Islamist party, the Jamaat-e-Islami. Their leaders have been hanged, and they as war criminals, etc. Now there are these two competing trends in Bangladesh, and let me then go out on a limb and say, do not underestimate the Islamic and by association the Pakistani factor in Bangladesh. I would still assert today that there are many people in Bangladesh, it's difficult to estimate, let's say 20-25%, whose psychological makeup is that of a Pakistani. And I think that is one of their major problems in their social and political discourse.
How are they spread between the two major parties?
Well, in Awami League, of course, nobody will you will never see them openly, but in BNP and Jamaat, of course, is well known that
Jamaat is well known.
It is linked to the Pakistani Jamaat, etc. And but in Awami League, even if they are closet Pakistanis, you would probably won't see them.
Okay, Professor Muni, on coming to more recent times, see, despite the turmoil of 2014 general election, Bangladesh has continued to hold elections since then. There have been city corporation elections, there have been mayoral elections, currently village level or union level elections, as they call, are going on. Each of these elections, to an outsider, looks as if it's been captured. There's violence. Some people are not allowed to fight the nominations. Those who file nominations, in scrutiny, they are rejected. Their polling agents are not allowed to go to the polling booth, and then Awami League declares victory. Now, so is there an attempt to show that democracy continues, even if only in form? As some people say that there seems to be an election project without being an election in Bangladesh.
Before I respond to this question, I want to go back fundamentally to your earlier question. Why should any state wear a majoritarian identity?
I'm not saying they should.
No. The first question.
The constitution of Bangladesh is Islamic Republic. It also says it's secular.
Just a minute. Let me come back to it. Because they are Islamic, there is no problem. But a Muslim majority country need not be Islamic country.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And secondly, the fundamental question is that any sectarian identity of the state would tear it internally apart, particularly in Asia, which are largely multi-ethnic, multi-religious
That broad
countries.
point is taken. Now come to the President.
On the second question, it seems you are absolutely correct that under the secularism identity, which we all might prefer, there is a quite massacre of democracy as it is. And I think this is a South Asian flavor to my mind. Everybody wants to finish the opposition, whatever else it is. I mean, you go back to Rajapaksa, the way he came up. There are such noises in India also, in Pakistan, in Nepal, anywhere you go. I think this is a typical distortion.
But to this extent, I mean, take India, we are also part of South Asia. How many opposition leaders are in jail today? In Bangladesh, they're in thousands.
No, that's true, but the cases are being filed. I'm saying the trend. I'm not saying the extent. You're right that in terms of the extent, yes, Bangladesh has overdone or undone all others. But this is the flavor of the subcontinent. And I feel this is actually a gross distortion of democratic systems which impinge very heavily on the people in general.
But by saying that this is happening all over South Asia, your argument seems to be minimizing what is happening in Bangladesh.
No, I'm putting it in perspective.
Okay, all right.
Because we cannot ignore it. We are all said and done the same people.
Okay. Hiranmay, you're from the media, so let's talk about the media in Bangladesh. Is the media under threat in Bangladesh? One of the most eminent editors of Bangladesh, the editor of Daily Star, Mahfouz Anam, has 89 sedition cases filed against him. The poor man doesn't know where he's going every morning. Some days he has to appear in 4 courts simultaneously. Then TV channels are being shut down. The chairman of ETV has been jailed. While he's in jail, his TV channel has faced a hostile takeover. Now, could all this happen without without nudge and a wink from the state?
Look, there is a certain amount of pressure on media in Bangladesh. Nobody can deny that.
From where?
Look, it couldn't have been there without the state, at least in condoning it. At least condoning it. But at the same time, I would like to point out that there are media personalities who have been doing things which a journalist should not do. And I would rather not comment on Mahfouz because I have reservations on that. But what I would say
we shouldn't say such things. You know, if you have reservations, either you say what those reservations
No, because
are.
I'll tell you
otherwise
what.
it looks like an allegation.
I'm not talking about the man. I'm talking about the case. As I said, I have reservations about that, not about because for the simple reason I would not like to mention things about which I do not have cast iron proof, about which is based on hearsay. And hearsay.
Again, this is conspiratorial.
No.
I really think forget
I'm not
Mahfouz
talking
Anam.
about
He's only a symbol of what's happening.
I'm not
Why is it
talking about
happening?
Mahfouz Anam as a person. I'm talking about the Mahfouz Anam case and not anything about an individual. Look, it is happening. It has always happened. Bangladesh media has always been under pressure. Khaleda Zia's time also.
Okay.
Bangladesh, if you see the by-elections between 2001 and 2006, each one of them has been rigged.
No. We are talking about the media. You're saying that this happens all over. Now, let me take a slightly different question.
I'm saying it has been happening throughout in Bangladesh. Media has been under pressure.
All right. We've run out of time. I wanted to ask you a question. I'll come back to you. We are discussing Bangladesh. As you know, this discussion will continue after a short break. Stay with us. Don't go away. Welcome back. We're discussing the polarized politics of Bangladesh and its consequences. Pinak, before you went on the break, I wanted to ask you this. You know, a huge part of Bangladesh's foreign exchange reserves has been stolen, they say, about $81 million from Federal Reserve by hackers. There was a stock market scam earlier. The financial sector is in a disarray. Where is governance in Bangladesh headed? Fed Reserve says that there was no hacking. SWIFT, which handles international bank transfers, says there's been no hacking. So was it an inside job?
Well, there's been a lot of speculation on that aspect, and you know where the money finally landed up in some casino owner in Philippines, who's now decided to return a part of it. Now, this is certainly a result of hacking. Now, the Fed Reserve says that it's only possible if there is some insider involvement. Now, as you know, the Bangladesh Bank, their Reserve Bank chairman has resigned. I mean, he had to. I mean, there was no way. Although he himself, I know him personally, is a good man and obviously cannot be involved.
And was doing good things.
And was doing good things. I have known him personally when I was High Commissioner. So I really think this is one of the most bizarre cases that I have heard. And I will not be surprised if there is some insider connection. Because Bangladeshi businessmen, let's face it, Bangladesh is probably at the highest in terms of corruption. If you look at the corruption index and transparency and all those things, Bangladesh is unfortunately a very corrupt country.
Okay, so bad governance.
Bad governance, corruption.
Okay. Let's change the subject a bit, Professor Muni. Do you think that Islamic State has found a foothold in Bangladesh, as some people suggest? Prime Minister Hasina says that this is all propaganda, that whatever violence you see is a result of what the opposition is doing. But ISIS announced its formation in Bangladesh in November last. Since then, they've claimed 26 incidents as their own. So do you think, and some so-called ISIS leaders have also been arrested. So is there Islamic State in Bangladesh?
Well, the Islamic State would certainly like to target Bangladesh. And that goes, even links up with the Rohingya issue, because most of the Rohingyas come to Bangladesh, and from Bangladesh, they were getting recruited even for Al-Qaeda earlier. And I don't rule out the possibility of some of the Islamic constituencies within Bangladesh trying to link up, because Jamaat has been...
Or rebrand themselves.
Or rebrand themselves, or go in as... No, you know, there are many stories that sometimes some of these young people go and get recruited even for money.
Okay.
Yes.
So it's not necessarily radicalization. There are various factors.
Okay.
And in South Asia, Bangladesh, Maldives and Pakistan are seen to be the constituencies for the IS to draw support from.
Okay, Hiranmay, what needs to be done to curb the influence of radical organizations like Islamic State in Bangladesh?
First of all, there has to be a crackdown. You cannot deal with militant terrorism without a very firm law and order response. Second, the law and order response has to be intelligent. It cannot be just a sledgehammer. It has to be a combination of sledgehammer and the rapier. Third, there has to be an ideological dimension. Bangladesh has a very strong secular constituency. The attempt of the government should be to reinforce that secular constituency. And not only that, for example, there have been arrests of bloggers. There have been arrests of people speaking Islamic fundamentalism. These arrests must stop.
Bloggers have been killed.
Yeah, bloggers. No, I'm talking about arrest of blogger. Killing is something by the fundamentalists.
Okay.
But the arrests have been by the government.
Okay.
So these arrests must stop. The bloggers should not be under any kind of pressure from the government.
Would you go a step further and say don't arrest the opposition either, so that don't shrink the middle ground where politics takes place, which is being occupied by extremists?
One cannot make a blanket statement like don't arrest the opposition. Depends on what the opposition does, what the charges are.
Or would you say keep the middle ground intact for
keep the middle ground
politics?
intact? I would say follow the rule of law. Follow the rule of law irrespective of who is the person concerned.
All right. Pinak, India has an excellent relationship with the Sheikh Hasina government and she's been extremely cooperative and things are going very well. But does India need to worry about political polarization in Bangladesh leading to Islamic radicalization? Because when political parties cannot function normally, these fringe groups come in.
That has been the argument of the BNP and the Jamaat, primarily.
Is that a wrong argument?
Well, it is an argument, it is a self-serving argument on their part, because they are seeking to achieve a certain degree of normality in the democratic discourse through this. So they try and tell India that if Prime Minister Hasina goes down this route of not having any opposition, then you are vacating the space for these things. So I am not sure that I completely buy this argument.
Self-serving it may be, but is it a wrong argument in a multi-party democracy?
Well, theoretically, ideologically, if you ask that, why decimate the opposition, I would obviously say don't do it, because opposition is so essential to the functioning of democracy. But then look at the opposition, what they have been doing. That opposition must also be responsible.
Absolutely.
That it must take part in the election. It cannot just boycott, thinking that then various other external forces, particularly Western countries, will come and bail them out. That cannot be the situation.
Okay. Do you agree with what Pinak is saying?
I think the government also has to, and the ruling party also has to move very carefully. Because if you push the opposition and try to finish it, then it is true that the middle ground would be in confusion, but the extremists or the fringe sections would really become far more violent and far more destructive, which is not good for the society. And somehow, conceding the point which Pinak is making, that beyond limit you can't make compromises, but still your strategy should be such that you don't push people on the edge.
The kind of violence that was unleashed during the 2014 elections, the kind of violence that has continued, the kind of violence that was again unleashed on the first anniversary of the 2014 elections. Now, these are some of the things which had to be dealt with. If you have a violent movement...
So, who unleashed this violence?
BNP and Jamaat, and avowed purpose of bringing down Sheikh Hasina's government. So, if you want to bring down a government through street violence, the government has to respond.
Okay. Pinak, this polarization will obviously continue. What can be done to encourage Bangladesh to hold its next election, whenever it is held, in a free and fair manner, so that democracy comes back in the form that is acceptable to all and Bangladesh stabilizes?
Well, everybody hopes that there is a free and fair election. And I hope BNP will participate in the next election, which I'm sure they will. But BNP also made the mistake of unleashing violence. And violence should not have a place in democratic discourse. But unfortunately, in a country like Bangladesh, it has become part of the toolkit of all politicians.
Okay. What needs to be done?
I would say that, for instance, the BNP leader now, under the present context, is asking for opening a dialogue with the ruling party.
They have asked. Yes.
I think the ruling party should respond to it. And while responding to it, it need not concede the basic demand which BNP is making repeatedly, that we will not go to elections unless you have a caretaker government.
So what will the dialogue be about?
Not within the constitution.
No,
this is what you should talk.
Solution.
They should go and tell them that, look, we have brought about a constitutional change.
Correct.
And we cannot now change the constitution just to suit your demand.
Okay.
And therefore, please come and participate in the elections, even if there is no caretaker government.
Yes, sir.
Whole idea of the caretaker government has been dismissed in the Bangladesh judiciary. So it's not a question of Sheikh Hasina scuttling the caretaker
I understand that. I'm merely asking you, do you think there should be a dialogue? Yes or no?
Of course.
Okay.
Of course
On
there
that
should be
happy
a
note,
dialogue.
we've really run out of time. I'd like to thank all of you. Hiranmay, Karlekar, Professor S.D. Muni, Ambassador Pinak, Chakravarty. Thank you very much for participating in this discussion. That is all we have for you today. We'll be back again as usual next week. Until then, goodbye and thanks for watching India's World.